formalmente estamos esperando que se siga sumando las personas, y es un placer para nosotros estar como acá con ustedes. Dado que Sibyl va a tener que retirarse en unos momentos, les damos la bienvenida a todos los que ya se están sumando a este encuentro virtual. Hoy tenemos el placer y, como siempre, el apoyo de la Embajada del Reino Unido en la presencia de Dominic Derbyshire, quien hoy nos va a hablar de la institución de la monarquía en el Reino Unido de Gran Bretaña y de qué se trata la ceremonia, y entender un poco más qué fue este evento, que es histórico no solamente para el Reino Unido, sino para el mundo, porque todos prestamos atención a lo que sucede desde lo formal, desde el mito, pero también desde la relevancia política. Así que, dándole ya la bienvenida a todos los que se nos han sumado, le entrego la palabra a Sibyl Rhodes, que es la directora de la licenciatura en Relaciones Internacionales de la UCEMA, y una de las más fervientes colegas y defensoras de este tipo de iniciativas dentro del OPEX en la UCEMA. Sibyl, somos todo oídos.
Muchas gracias, Juan. Es un placer, siempre es un placer participar en los eventos, y sí, especialmente eventos de este tipo en la Catedra del Reino Unido. Les agradezco a la Embajada Británica y a Bretaña también por estar con nosotros. Siempre hay un gran público y siempre disfruto de estas exposiciones. Estamos especialmente agradecidos que Dominic Derbyshire va a dar su presentación, especialmente porque nos contó que está con la hija un poco enferma y está muy cansado como joven padre. Así que doblemente agradecidos, Dominic. Dominic ha estado acá en su puesto como director de Asuntos Políticos y Proyectos en la Embajada hace unos 3 meses. Él es licenciado en Historia de la Universidad de Newcastle upon Tyne, ¿no? Y también nos estuvo contando algo interesante, que está estudiando la maestría o un posgrado en asuntos argentinos en la UBA, pero tuvo que venir rápidamente. O sea, nos explicó que su castellano se cortó un poco, está aprendiendo acá en sitio. Oh, he is learning English, learning Spanish on the job acá en Argentina, y por eso prefiere dictar la exposición en inglés, pero nos explicó que las preguntas, si se pueden hacer en inglés en el chat, muy bien, y si no, si es difícil, por supuesto, en castellano, y acá Juan y yo podemos ayudar con las traducciones. No quiero decir nada más, estoy ansiosa para escuchar la presentación de Dominic. So Dominic, welcome, thank you very much. The screen is yours.
Muchísimas gracias, Juan y Sibyl también. Un placer estar acá y gracias otra vez por su invitación. As explained, I will be conducting my presentation on the coronation and on the modern role of the British royal family in English. I hope to speak as clearly as possible, and if there are any questions at the end about anything that I've said or anything that I've left unsaid, then please, I welcome those. what I'm planning to do is talk a little bit about the event of the coronation itself, the great global event that it was. Well over a month ago now, time flies. And then I will talk a little bit about His Majesty the King himself and the other members of the royal family and what they mean in modern British society. So to start, of course, on the 6th of May, we saw the great global event that was the coronation of their Majesties, King Charles III and Queen Camilla, as they are now known. Now, King Charles III, formerly known as the Prince of Wales, became king on the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, on the 8th of September 2022, last year. But of course, the formality of the coronation event itself had to wait some months, being a huge global event and not something that's quite very quick to plan. And anyone who saw the coronation of their Majesties will know that it was a hugely significant cultural event and political event for the United Kingdom, but one that also had a global reach. And it wasn't just in Argentina that this event would have hit the headlines. 214 delegations attended from all over the world, including 90 heads of state. And the coronation itself was surrounded by other events, both public cultural events and major diplomatic events and conferences, etc., to bring together global heads of state as an opportunity to bring those heads of state together. It was the first coronation, of course, since Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was crowned in June 1953. The Queen devoted 70 years of loyal service as the longest reigning monarch in British history. And of course, this meant that for very many of us, global viewers and British viewers alike, this was the first event of its kind that we'd seen. So on the 6th of May, the world gathered to watch this ancient ceremony at historic Westminster Abbey in the heart of London, wherein the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, crowned His Majesty King Charles III and Her Majesty the Queen in a day of historic and ancient ceremony, pageantry, and spectacle, with people from all over the world visiting Britain's capital to witness this historic occasion and this real once in a generation, once in a lifetime, really, occasion. Westminster Abbey itself has been the church of Britain's coronation since 1066. So, you know, we're talking almost 1,000 years of British royal history. King Charles III himself was the 40th monarch to swear the traditional oath of faithful service. And the coronation event included many other very historic elements, including ceremonial robes, the golden orb and scepter of the British sovereign, and a 700-year-old throne known as the coronation chair, which sits above what's known as the Stone of Scone, or the Stone of Destiny, which has historically been used to inaugurate Scottish kings. Now, of course, the Scottish and English thrones are unified. Now, the king was crowned with the solid gold St. Edward's crown, which was originally made for King Charles II in 1661 and is decorated with 444 precious stones, including rubies, amethysts, and sapphires. And it's actually so heavy, this crown, that the monarch only wears it very briefly at the moment of coronation. It's simply not possible to use it for any other event, or indeed for the whole of the ceremony of the coronation itself. But an important change that we saw for this coronation was the introduction of several more modern elements and personal touches that reflected the king's role today and how he looks towards the future and wants to ensure that the British royal family reflects modern British society. For example, Archbishop Welby anointed King Charles with holy oil, a very historic, significant part of the ceremony that was made in Jerusalem to His Majesty's specifications using only plant-based ingredients, reflecting the King's long-standing history of environmental activism and protection. The King also commissioned 12 new pieces of music for the occasion, including an anthem by British composer Andrew Lloyd Webber, a very, very famous British composer of theatre. Songs were performed at the ceremony in English and Welsh, with a British gospel choir and Greek Orthodox music in memory of the King's father, Prince Philip, who was born in Corfu in Greece. So with these new elements, the King was able to reflect not only his own personal style and his own personal wishes, but also some more modern touches that were intended to better reflect modern multicultural British society. Other historic elements, of course, included the state coaches that were used in the processions from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Abbey and back to the palace. Now, the coach that was used to travel to Westminster Abbey, the Diamond Jubilee State Coach, was created for Queen Elizabeth II to commemorate the 60th anniversary of Her late Majesty's reign in 2012. And in fact, their Majesties travelled back to Buckingham Palace in an entirely separate coach, the Gold State Coach, which was commissioned in 1760, so almost 300 years ago now, and was first used by King George III in 1762. It was drawn by 8 horses, but due to its weight of 4 tons, could only travel at walking pace. So we can see some very, very historic elements of the coronation were included too. Back to the sort of modern multicultural elements, the procession included armed forces from across the Commonwealth of Nations and from British overseas territories, and all services of the armed forces, really an attempt to reflect the sort of breadth of British society and also the breadth of the role of the British sovereign. Another manner in which the King hoped to better reflect modern multicultural Britain is that the tradition of high-level political attendance from within the UK was abandoned in favour of invitations being extended to 850 community and charity representatives from around the UK, including 450 British Empire Medal recipients. Usually community activists and those that have been nominated by their communities for services to their communities and to Britain, and also 400 youth representatives and activists, really reflecting the King's long-standing tradition of supporting youth activism and youth work itself. A final point to mention about the coronation as a global event was that the UK also celebrated the occasion with wider public events, including on the 7th of May, a coronation concert that gathered together contemporary stars and global music icons, and was attended by 10,000 ballot winners, ticket winners, and volunteers from their Majesty's charities as well. So those people again who have contributed to our British communities were recognised in that way by their attendance at this coronation concert. And then finally, in tribute to His Majesty the King's life of public service, there was an event on the 8th of May called the Big Help Out that encouraged people to try volunteering for the first time and to join work to support their local areas and their local communities. So it really was a series of events and a sort of very widely public event. And I should say, of course, that the coronation only within the UK alone was viewed by, on average, at any given moment, but 20 million people in the UK. So you can understand that for a 4-hour event, that's a huge number. I'll talk a little bit about the King himself, a bit of his history, his personal history, and then I'll move on to the modern role of the British royal family, and then I'll move on to questions. Now, in addition to being the oldest monarch to exceed the throne in British history at the age of 73, His Majesty the King was also the longest serving heir to the throne, of course, and he became heir to the throne, or heir apparent, I should say, in 1952, when Queen Elizabeth II was proclaimed queen, or acceded to the throne upon the death of her father, King George VI, in February 1952. The King studied at Cambridge University. This makes him the first British monarch in British history to hold a university degree, which is in itself quite interesting. He's a qualified pilot and diver. He also served in the Royal Navy for some years. He's played polo for over 40 years, and he can play the cello. So he's quite broadly accomplished in that respect. In his personal life, I'm sure my Argentinian audience will know very well some of the sort of stories of the then Prince of Wales' life. In 1981, the Prince of Wales married Lady Diana Spencer in the St. Paul's Cathedral, historic, beautiful cathedral in the heart of London. And the Prince and Princess of Wales had 2 sons, Prince William, born in 1982, and Prince Harry, born in 1984. Of course, again, as we probably all know, not least if any of the audience here have watched The Crown, the couple sadly divorced in 1996, and even more tragically, the princess was killed in a car crash in 1997, and the prince, as he was then, flew to Paris with the princess's sisters to bring her body back to London. Moving on to happier times, the 1999 visit of the Prince of Wales to Argentina was very well received by government and public alike. The Prince was personally hosted by President Carlos Menem, and his visit combined classically Argentine social pursuits of polo, of course he's a big fan, and tango, with some more somber and serious elements, as the Prince was able to meet with veterans of the 1982 conflict and laid a wreath at the Monument to the Fallen. And gave a speech at the Casa Rosada as well. And newspaper headlines at the time welcomed the Prince's efforts to avoid politicizing the visit and his clear message of reconciliation at the time in 1999. And then finally, it's worth noting April 2005, more than 18 years ago now, the Prince of Wales and Mrs. Camilla Parker Bowles, now Her Majesty the Queen, were married in a civil ceremony at the Guildhall in Windsor. A bit more about the King's interests. He is a keen supporter of the charities and public work. He's taken a keen and active interest in British public life. He himself, as Prince of Wales, primarily has been instrumental in establishing over 20 charities personally over a period of around 40 years, including the Prince's Trust, the Prince's Foundation, and the Prince of Wales Charitable Fund. He's also the patron or president of more than 400 other organisations. Particularly, there are a few causes he particularly champions, including the welfare of young people and their participation in society, supporting Britain's rural and farming communities, the protection of the natural environment more widely. He's been a sort of environmental defender for over 50 years, and actually gave his first speech on environmental issues when he was only 21 in 1970. He is also very keen on promoting tolerance and greater understanding between religious faiths and communities, and protecting the arts and championing traditional craft and heritage skills in Britain as well. He's used his position to basically shine a light on issues that are, as he sees it, less well known or less well publicized or potentially less well funded, including the environmental issue. And he actually has a newly discovered endangered species of Ecuadorian tree frog named after him, which I'm not going to try and pronounce. Okay, I'll try and pronounce it. Hyloskirtus Prince Charlesi, the Prince Charles stream tree frog. So there we have it. And I have to say, before researching this presentation, I wasn't aware that the King, His Majesty the King, has an Ecuadorian tree frog named after him. But I think, if anything was to well reflect his lifelong service and defence of the natural environment, I can't think of a more fitting tribute. That's a bit about the life of His Majesty the King. I'm going to move on now to the role of the modern royal family in the modern United Kingdom. Now, monarchy is the oldest form of government in the United Kingdom. In a monarchy, the king or queen is the head of state, but the British monarchy is known as a constitutional monarchy, which means that while the sovereign is the head of state, the ability to make and pass legislation and create law resides within a democratically elected parliament, of course. So one way that constitutional jurists have explained this is that the king reigns, but he does not rule, which is to say the sovereign reigns, but they do not rule. The ruling is done by an elected government, and as head of state in the UK, the king is constitutionally obliged to follow the government's advice. This is for UK audiences and international audiences alike, quite a difficult concept to reconcile, to understand fully, and it really does reflect the constitutional role of the monarchy that has developed over hundreds, if not thousands, of years of UK history. To speak a bit about the king's roles and functions as head of state, several of the main and most important constitutional roles are to appoint the Prime Minister and all other ministers in cabinet, to open new sessions of Parliament, and to give royal assent to bills which is say legislation passed by our parliament, signifying that they've become law, and that's the final stage, royal assent, in the enacting of any legislation in the United Kingdom. So incredibly important constitutional roles that the king holds, but nonetheless he or she does not have the ability to make and pass legislation. That, of course, is the prerogative of the democratically elected parliament and the executive within that. There are also other roles. He receives incoming and outgoing ambassadors, of course. He or she makes other senior appointments, including judges. But in all of these things, he acts on the advice of the government of the day. And part of that is he has a weekly audience with the Prime Minister, and receives daily boxes of state papers for his signature or for his information. Also has regular meetings with senior officials to ensure that there's regular communication between all arms of government and the sovereign. But the modern role of the sovereign is so much wider than their constitutional role, because the role of the royal family has developed over hundreds, if not thousands of years. And although the sovereign no longer has an executive political role, he or she continues to play an important part in the life of the nation. The monarch undertakes representational duties that have developed over 1,000 years. Each year, the sovereign and other members of the royal family carry out over 2,000 engagements in the UK and overseas. So overseas visits, but also receiving visitors to the UK, including visiting heads of state, meeting guests at official parties and functions, and presenting members of the public with their honours at investiture ceremonies to really recognise those that have given back to their communities from all walks of life. And in this manner, the sovereign and other members of the royal family act as ambassadors for the United Kingdom on overseas visits or by receiving incoming visits. And in addition to these state duties, the monarch has a less formal role as what's known as the head of the nation, or what could be described as the head of the nation, really acting as a sort of focal point for national identity, unity, and national pride. The sovereign recognises success and excellence, including supporting the ideal or the aspiration towards voluntary service and giving back to one's community. And that's also something supported by other members of the immediate royal family. The king or queen also fulfills this role through speeches such as the Queen's address to the nation at the start of the COVID epidemic, or which is to say that Her Majesty the Queen's annual broadcast on Christmas Day, now the sovereign's annual broadcast, and giving honours to recognise public and voluntary service, or visiting members of our armed forces, visiting schools, hospitals, charities, etc. And I think here we sort of land on one of the less tangible roles of the royal family, which is to, as I say, act as a focal point for national identity, but also to give a sense of stability and continuity. One of the pitfalls, if I might describe it that way, of vibrant democracy and proud democracy, as the UK and indeed Argentina are proud democratic nations, is sometimes a sense or a sentiment from the public of continual political change and turmoil, and a real, at times, a sense of sort of being unanchored. And the British royal family, and particularly the sovereign of the day, is able to give a sense of political and cultural stability and continuity. And this is for me, this is one of the most sort of personal aspects of the British royal family, and one of the least tangible or hardest to describe, which is to say that whether or not one considered oneself a royalist, to use that term, no one in the United Kingdom was unaffected by the death of Her Majesty the Queen last year. The Queen had been a real icon globally, but also, of course, within the UK, almost a sort of a national figurehead, a national almost motif, someone that in unspoken terms had always been there, and again unspoken, you felt a sense as a Brit that the Queen would always be there. You know, I am now heading devastatingly fast towards the age of 40, and the Queen had been the Queen for my entire life, and I really felt a sense of personal loss at her passing. And I know anecdotally and through newspaper stories and articles around the time of her death that there were so many people across the country and indeed globally who were deeply affected by the loss of Her Majesty, really giving a sense then that the Queen, or indeed the sovereign writ large of the United Kingdom, actually does give that sense of stability and continuity in an otherwise hectic and fast-changing world, not just for the population of the United Kingdom, but also for populations across the world, whether or not they are associated with Britain or whether or not they support the British government of the day. We really got a sense that public sentiment was firmly behind the British sovereign at that time, and that, yes, people held the Queen in their hearts with a great deal of affection. And finally, on that note, it's worth mentioning, of course, that the sovereign of the United Kingdom is not just the sovereign of the United Kingdom, but also of 14 other Commonwealth realms, what are known as the Commonwealth realms, including independent nations in Oceania and the Pacific, and also in the Caribbean and elsewhere. Not only that, but the British sovereign is also the head of the Commonwealth, which is a voluntary political association of 56 independent member states, including all of the Commonwealth realms, but also a majority of which a majority of those independent member states are also republics, but that voluntarily exist within the Commonwealth, which, as I say, is a political association of 56 countries that have committed to supporting democracy, good governance, human rights, and equality. I think I will stop there. I think I've talked for quite long enough. I hope everyone found that interesting. I tried to be as succinct as possible. It turns out there is a lot of detail when you're talking about a ceremony that has developed almost organically for 1,000 years. Equally, and indeed a royal family that's existed for hundreds, if not thousands of years. I relish the idea of any of your questions. I look forward to them. I cannot guarantee that I will be able to answer them, but I will do my best.
Thank you, Dominic, for being as succinct, as successful to explain us how close to the United Kingdom soul the royal family is. And actually, I think because of the way you presented that the royal family is the soul of the United Kingdom. If you allow me, when we wait for the questions that right now it's going to starting to appear, my first question is related to the Queen Elizabeth, and as an historian, I would like to know which one do you consider is her most sustainable or longer or durable legacy? If you think of the Queen Elizabeth, which is his most important legacy, not only for the United Kingdom, but for the Commonwealth, and also, if you like, I know she was quite important in the reconciliation part of the relation between Argentina and the United Kingdom after the war. I would like to know your view on her legacy.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the question. You broke up just a little bit there, but I think I heard all of the question. Queen Elizabeth's most enduring legacy, and I think you really hit the nail on the head, to use an idiom. You really put your finger on the issue. For me, it's a really interesting question. I'd say probably there are two main legacies that I would identify. And the first is the beginnings of the, how to put this, the beginnings of the opening up and the creation of a more accessible, publicly accessible royal family that Queen Elizabeth began the process of, and now His Majesty the King is firmly sort of taking on as his own, which is to say that the Queen grew up in a world where the royal family was beyond question, beyond investigation, beyond really almost beyond interpretation by the United Kingdom public, by the British public, or indeed still less anyone else in the world. But the Queen's firm belief was that the monarchy should be accessible and should represent the British people and should be seen by the British people, and that really encouraged her to not only to visit widely within the UK. She conducted I don't have the number in front of me, but I think I'm right in saying literally hundreds of thousands of meetings with the British public, but also hundreds of visits overseas to visit with not only members of the Commonwealth realms, the other Commonwealth nations, but also visit far and wide to create a more accessible and publicly understood royal family. And the second one that I'd just like to touch on, and you touched on it yourself, her role in terms of sort of winning the peace after the conflict between Argentina and the UK. I think, without going into too much detail on that very specific subject, I would say that the Queen's presence, both after that tragic conflict, but also in relation to other issues, particularly conflicts and social conflicts within the UK, the Queen's presence as an ameliorating voice, as a calming and a voice that represented political stability. She was able to have those difficult conversations potentially with either the government of the day or indeed international partners that sort of politicians, democratically elected politicians, can't have. You know, using that the sort of prerogative and the privilege of that comes with the role for the good of not just of the UK but also international partners.
Thank you. The following question is from Civil Road, which is she wants to know about young people in Britain and the view of the king and the monarchy right now.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question. And I think it points towards a changing view of the royal family within the UK. And let's be honest, I think it was widely publicized, for example, that there were protests and there were those in the UK who weren't supportive of the coronation of His Majesty the King. Some of that came from youth groups and sort of Republican groups. And it does point towards changing attitudes towards the royal family, potentially also points towards a sort of reassessment of British history and a new understanding of what a modern, democratic, culturally diverse Britain should represent and the role of the monarchy within that. So there are signs that there are, conversations are starting around the role of the monarchy, around the continued relevance of the monarchy. But I certainly wouldn't want to overstate how influential those are. Those conversations are happening, but as in any vibrant democracy, that plurality of views is something that we should all welcome. And I think it's something that the royal family themselves, and particularly His Majesty the King, have gone to great lengths to ensure that the royal family remains relevant and remains an aspect of British society and culture that contributes to the country. Often the aspect that is criticised by those who seek to criticise the monarchy from within Britain, is the cost. And it should be noted that the royal family more than pay for themselves in terms of not only their own activities, but in terms of our soft power, to use a sort of modern phrase, and to increase the sort of cultural output and the cultural reach of our beautiful tiny island in the northeastern Atlantic. Or I should say our islands in the northeastern Atlantic, which is not to be sniffed at. I think somebody said to me the other day, how would everyone choose London over, say, Ireland? Ireland is a beautiful country. Why is it that so many millions of tourists flock to London particularly? And now London has a great deal to offer, but I certainly think that royal palaces are something that not every city can boast.
True. Actually, it is true. It is quite interesting. Also, the guard change is another beautiful look.
The many aspects. Absolutely.
So, Gabriel Zanotti wonders what's the role of the king right now as the head of the England Church.
Really, really interesting question. If I'm honest with you, I know much less about the role of the king as the head of the church. It's in terms of his responsibilities, which is to say, I know a lot more about the history, as you might expect, of this role. Gabrielle, I think it was, who asked the question. You may well know the history behind that, why the English, as it was then, the English monarch is the head of a very English church. And if you don't, I do encourage you to look up the story, because it's very, very interesting. And some might say that it was only as a result of King Henry VIII wanting to divorce his wife at a time when the Pope in Rome wouldn't allow that. His role the sovereign's role as the head of our national Protestant church is still a very important one for the monarch, and I know that Queen Elizabeth II took that role very, very seriously. As I say, I know sadly not enough about the sort of day-to-day, how it functions daily, but I can tell you that Queen Elizabeth II's faith, and now His Majesty the King's faith, were and are very, very important to them, and they take that role very seriously as representatives of our national church.
And I think this is a hard one. Amalia Vanoli asks, what is the real meaning of the stone of destiny in the ceremony? I was in Scotland last month, and Scots are not happy with the stone affair. So I think that is a problematic question.
It's a very, very tough question. Who gave me that one? No.
Amalia.
Well, yes. Well, very good, Amalia. Thank you for that. No, great question. So now, some of you may have seen the film Braveheart, starring Mel Gibson, and may know that our separate kingdoms, England, Wales, and Scotland, as was at the time, were not necessarily always the best of friends. There are still some English people who like to tease Scots, and still some Scots who like to tease English people, particularly when we're playing against each other in the Rugby World Cup or in the Six Nations. Our countries have interesting and complicated histories, which to me makes it all the more wonderful that we are now this one unified nation under one flag, one sovereign, and one government. But yes, you've hit the nail on the head. The stone of destiny, or the stone of scone, depending on how you want to call it, was historically the sort of motif, or the I don't want to say throne, but a very important part of the ceremony of the crowning of the Scottish royal line. When the English and Welsh, I should say, and Scottish crowns, the two separate crowns, were unified in, I'm going to get the year wrong now, 1606, I believe. 1606. James II was the representative of both the English and the Scottish, English and Welsh and the Scottish crowns. And as a result, he was crowned using a sort of hybrid ceremony that included elements of the Scottish ceremony itself and the English ceremony. It's interesting. I will have to ask you more about your experiences in Scotland and how people there felt about the use of the stone of destiny in the coronation. But we should remind ourselves that our sovereign firmly represents every part of our United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. But very good question.
Thank you. Another one from Jesus Martin Frade. What about the Freemasonry and the role of His Majesty Charles III? I think it's in relation to Freemasonry or something like that. I'm not quite sure.
I'm afraid I don't have any information about his association with that. No.
Okay.
It's not something I'm aware of, I'm afraid.
No worries. Jesús, si podés ampliar un poco más tu pregunta en castellano o en inglés, así se la podemos encontrar alguna respuesta para vos. Yo tengo, I have another question on it is true that after the death of the Queen Elizabeth, Charles immediately was compared with his mother, right? And I think that the question is he going to live under her mother's shadow in his own reign? What do you think about it? As an historian, not as a social, as a diplomat. I'm asking, what do you think about it?
Absolutely. Really interesting question. I suppose for this one, absolutely, I'm not speaking as a representative of His Majesty's government, but as a historian, as a Brit who has lived, as I say, his whole life with the Queen. I think you're absolutely right. I think the King has a mountain to climb, a very hard task to be seen in the same light as our longest reigning monarch. There are, I'm not the only Brit. All Brits have lived. Certainly, all Brits have lived the majority of their lives under one Queen, and she was almost universally adored in the United Kingdom. Again, for all of those reasons I mentioned, that sense of public service, that sense of duty, that sense of political stability, particularly at times of national sort of catastrophe, crisis, and national or other difficult situations, and sort of the being tossed upon the waves of history. It's not a task I would revel in, but we should also remember that the King himself has a history of over 50 years of public service himself. Mm-hmm. And in that way, I think that's yet another aspect, I would say, that points towards the continuity and the stability that we can see within the royal family. He's been, as I say, he's the longest holder of the title heir to the throne in history. Nobody really envied him that title, for his sort of his life of almost being seen to be waiting for the throne. But he has filled that life with public service inside the UK, and increasingly, as Her Majesty the Queen got older and slightly more frail, she had to pull back from public life and from her public duties, including, of course, overseas visits. And we saw increasingly the then Prince of Wales take on that role. So I think you're absolutely right. It's a very, very hard task to stand up against our longest serving monarch. But I think if anybody would be able to do it, it would be His Majesty the King, with his really honest, open lifetime of service. And I also think, just on a personal note, I think we really have to reflect on his, as I say, more than 50 years, particularly, of banging the drum for environmental protection. And he was talking about environmental protection in the 70s before anybody was talking about this, and before it was, sort of fashionable, which it seems ridiculous when you're talking about climate change and environmental degradation, but it is true. And I think he deserves a huge amount of credit for his vast amount of work to bring attention and shine light on that issue, which I'm sure those amongst yourself and those amongst the audience will agree is, I think, the preeminent issue of our times.
Thank you. Before the Jesus Martin Frade upgrade of his question, I would like to ask you, related with his foreign functions. have King Charles ever made some comments about the war in Ukraine? Has he hold any position, or he must remain in silence in order as one of the top diplomats in a way from the United Kingdom?
That's a very, very interesting question. If His Majesty the King has made any comments on Ukraine, I'm certainly not aware of them. But you point towards, of course, to the sovereign's political neutrality, which is to say that you know, the sovereign's constitutional roles require that they fulfill their duties without partisan favour. Or political favour to one British political party or another. But I mean, on occasions, the British sovereign will comment on issues that can be perceived as political, of course. You know, as I say, if even climate change is political or can be politicized, then you know it's almost impossible then not to stray into political issues. I'm not aware of His Majesty the King having said anything specifically on the subject of Ukraine in order to preserve that constitutional function of objectivity or perceived objectivity. But I think anyone on this call could probably guess or divine at His Majesty the King's private views.
Thank you. And the last one, Jesus Martin previously asked about the role of His Majesty Charles III on Freemasonry, and he present his role as the United Grand Lodge of England, and he comments that the Duke of Kent is now the Grand Master of that lodge, that Freemasonry. Yeah. Do you have something to add? Or?
I'm really sorry, and thank you very much for restating the question, Jesus Martin. I'm afraid it's not something I know anything about. The Prince of Wales, and now His Majesty the King, is an active member of literally hundreds of British organisations, community organisations, and voluntary organisations, and the like. And I only know the very smallest amount about the organisation that we're talking about, the Freemasons. I'm not aware of those roles, so I'm really sorry that I simply can't answer the question. But maybe it's something that I need to look into myself. And if we ever get the chance to speak, Jesus Martin, I can update you in the future. Who knows?
Dominic, let me remark the words of Civil Rose, which she thanks you, and also I am thanking you for your splendid presentation. You're very candid, quite clear about it, and you put a lot of information in a small space of time. So thank you so much. It was with a smile, which was amazing, considering that you are quite tired right now. But we are ending our meeting for today, but before that, I would like to ask to Alejandro Campos if he wants to say goodbye to you as our partner in crime, to put
absolutely.
Yes, of course. And well, Dominic, really, it was a great speech. It was a lot of information, which I guess most of the attendees didn't really know up to now. I think you helped us very much, and also helping USIMA to bring this type of lectures and speeches that help us to really have more information that helps us to to have a much stronger relationship and be close to a very important country in the world as the UK, and for us as a Chamber of Commerce, of course, is an opportunity to share all this information with all our members and all the community that follows us. Not only in this at this moment, because this speech will be shared in the USIMA website, in our website, through YouTube. So really, I'm very thankful for you guys, and really again, congratulations for such a very interesting speech.
And thank you for helping us to create another bridge between our countries and our communities. Dicho esto, los esperamos a todos ustedes el 6 de julio. Vamos a contar con la presencia de la embajadora en presencia en la USEMA, en un seminario muy interesante sobre diversidad y mundo empresario. Gracias a todos, buenas noches. Dominic, muchísimas gracias por haber compartido esta hora con nosotros.
Gracias a todos y todas.
Adiós.
Y gracias por sus preguntas.
Gracias.
Gracias. Hasta luego.
Adiós.